One of Manitoba's Indigenous leaders, Nepinak, recently partnered with Canadian Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg to bring awareness of the truths our Indigenous people face today within our own struggles of freedom. It is our honor to be given permission to share a sacred event, bringing you the full story this Nijaway with Net News Ledger.
Welcome. We're here this morning at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg, Manitoba. My name is Isabelle Masson. I'm the lead curator of the Mandela Struggle for Freedom exhibit, which opened here in June 2018. The museum is closed today, but we're here with Indigenous leader Nepinak, known as Nepinak, for a special event and occasion today. We've just taken part in a ceremony in preparation for this event. Nepinak intends on spending 27 hours in our reproduction of the Mandela's prison cell as part of our exhibition here at the museum. He will spend 27 hours in the cell as a connection to the 27 years that Mandela spent in prison as part of his struggle against apartheid in South Africa. As part of his experience of spending 27 hours in the cell, he will do so fasting with no food or water.
My name is Derek Nepinak, and I am an Anishinaabe. Today I'm beginning a 27-hour fast of no food and no water inside the Nelson Mandela replica jail cell at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights on Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. The 27 hours represents 1 hour for each year Mandela was in prison because of his resistance to the oppression of colonialism. My intent here today is to draw recognition to the fact that while it is important to celebrate victories over colonialism and human rights abuses, Indigenous peoples here still face an ongoing reality of colonialism and genocide, right here in the nation-state of Canada. Nelson Mandela's life taught us that even while contained within the most oppressive and violent of racialized colonial state mechanisms, love and freedom of spirit can persevere. Mandela's example should continue to not only bring us lessons in resistance, but it should also bring hope to us as Indigenous people living our colonization here in the nation-state. The message here is that we too can persevere and find ways to build our freedom from the confines of a colonial nation-state that denies the existence of our self-determination. The Mandela exhibit at the Canadian Human Rights Museum is one of the most well-defined examples in the world of the force of colonial rule on Indigenous people, and provides us an opportunity to identify the parallels between South African apartheid and our own experiences of segregation and marginalization in Canada. Walking through the Mandela exhibit, you see the parallels between apartheid in South Africa and our own experience within colonial policy and law. For example, South African colonial authorities created separate identification for Black South Africans whom they refer to as natives. Black South Africans had to carry pass books and had to produce these books on demand by colonial authorities. This was done to control the movement of Indigenous people and to keep people confined to reserves. This is very similar to the pass system that our families lived with in the late 1800s through the mid-1900s, and also parallels today's status Indian card that many Indigenous people carry today here in Canada. Another example, in South Africa, Section 2 of the Bantu Education Act of 1953 states, the state has control over Black people's education. Black and white education systems are separate, and Blacks will receive only minimal education. In Canada, our people were also undergoing a separate and apart education system that was violent and designed to assimilate or destroy us and our culture. There are many more parallels I could raise, but my intent here is to identify the consistency in the application of colonialism across the British Empire. There is an onus on us as Indigenous people to not only continue to wake up to our colonial reality, but to work to overcome it by rebuilding our institutions of governance, our social and kinship systems, our economies, and our physical and mental well-being. This does not mean building ourselves into the political and legal systems of the colonizing state or co-drafting their legislation. Rather, it means acknowledging efforts to reinvigorate our laws from the traditions and ancient laws that are still there for us to learn and implement. There are Indigenous people doing this work all across Turtle Island, and we have to acknowledge and validate their work instead of funneling critical issues into Ottawa-sponsored committee tables intent on taking possession of our own solutions. This Canadian Human Rights Museum is built at the intersection of what we now call the Red and Assiniboine Rivers. It is built at a location where we as Indigenous people converged for trade and commerce and diplomacy for thousands of years prior to the arrival of our European brothers and sisters. These lands are settled by treaty agreements that were signed by the ancestors of today's Indigenous community. In our treaty negotiations, we agreed to allow for immigration, and we consented and welcomed immigrants from all parts of the world who were fleeing political oppression, famine, and now today, the effects of climate change. As Indigenous people, despite the oppression we have faced in colonization, we still welcome people from all over the world today. I want our brothers and sisters and all of our relations from the South who have walked their way north from their homelands to know that we love you and we respect you, and you are welcome to come to the ancestral lands of our people here north of the Medicine Line. This is a place where the union of the eagle and condor can be strengthened, and we welcome you. Migrations of humans will continue to accelerate as global warming displaces people from their homelands, forcing us to build a new nation of humanity that will hopefully be less focused on artificial borders and more focused on a peaceful coexistence. Miigwech, thank you.
Everyone, and thank you for joining us. Bonjour tout le monde et merci d'être ici dans notre présence. The Canadian Museum for Human Rights welcomes this opportunity to encourage conversations about human rights and forge connections between communities. Our role includes a responsibility to act as a national platform for dialogue about human rights from multiple perspectives. The exhibition here in the museum's Level 1 gallery has been inspiring our visitors to think and talk about racism, about inequality and equality, and taking action for change. Nelson Mandela's example continues to be a source of inspiration for people around the world, including here in Canada, who are striving to build relationships in the shadow of gross human rights violations. Around the corner in this exhibition, we show how First Nations in Canada tried to generate awareness during the international anti-apartheid campaign of the 1980s, and they were faced by the same issues. 30 years later, many of these concerns remain. Derek Nepinak has just spent 27 hours in this replica of Mandela's prison cell reflecting, and I'd like to now give him the floor to share on his reflections.
Bujuni Ichiwagana, Liban Makwa, Indigenous Kazmakwan Totem. My name is Derek Nepinak, and it's been my great honor to be here for the last 27 hours and a few minutes. 1 hour of fasting for each year that Mandela spent fighting oppression in his homelands. I chose this opportunity at this time because the good people here at the Canadian Museum of Human Rights put this exhibit together to share the message to the world that despite the challenges we face as human beings, the systems of oppression that are out there, we can still challenge these together, and we can find hope, and we can find love, and we might just find freedom at the end of the trail somewhere. I think that the timing of this coincides with a lot of the similar challenges that we still face here, living in the nation state of Canada as Indigenous people. It was mentioned that 30 years ago, Chief Louis Stevenson, tried to raise the profile of our own apartheid here at home, and we need to continue to do that work. I only do this work because I love my kids, I love my family, I love my community, I love the Anishinaabe Nation, and I think that under our treaties, the original principles of forming good relationships are still there, and we can still find ways to make these things work. I wonder sometimes, though, where is our mobilization? Where is our revolution to overcome the challenges we face in a nation state where sometimes, those barriers that we have to address are a little bit more subversive or a little bit hidden from the blind eye. But nonetheless, we still have the outcomes that many people have fought, through in other colonial jurisdictions in other parts of the world. We have our children being taken away right from the hospitals. We have epidemic suicide rates in our communities. We have no access to safe drinking water. We have very poor housing conditions in so many of our communities across our territory, but yet so many Canadians enjoy such a high standard of living. And we ponder these things in an era of climate change, when people are starting to migrate, people are starting to leave their homelands because they recognize they're no longer safe. Global warming is going to accelerate, and people are going to begin migrating much quicker. And if we don't find ways of finding hope and love in these circumstances, we're going to face very difficult days ahead. I think about our brothers and sisters at the border, the southern U.S. border with Mexico right now. By the thousands, people are down there, men, women, children, struggling to try and find peace, struggling to try and find freedom. They're not criminals. They're just like you and I are. They're just looking for a place to call home, a place to live in peace, and we need to support that. So that was part of my message here as well. And I want to thank the museum for agreeing to work with me on this. I had originally contemplated just coming in here and sitting down and not leaving for 27 hours, but there was no need to frame this as a protest or a sit-in, because nobody's done anything wrong here. Everybody's trying to do the right thing by promoting dialogue and understanding and finding ways to be respectful. Because when you find ways to be respectful, you just might find allies there. And I think that's something that we all need to be aware of as we move forward into the challenging times ahead. So I want to thank John Young. I know he can't be here today, but he was part of our early meetings. All the staff, the executive, the curator, the media and communication staff, they've all done a wonderful job. And Winnipeg should be proud of the people who work here, because they do a world-class facility here. Miigwech. I'll answer any questions that anybody might have.
Can you explain the ceremony why you had to decline the offerings 3 times before you could accept?
In our traditional ceremonies, when the leader sits down, he's always supposed to be the last one to eat or the last one to drink. So we're supposed to feed the children first. We're supposed to water the children first. We're supposed to feed and water the elderly, our elders, our old people. Then you feed and water the people, and then the leader eats and drinks last. That's the way the protocols are supposed to be. I know some communities don't follow them that way, but that's the Anishinaabe Nation. That's how we do it.
Can you tell us how you spent the 27 hours?
I spent the 27 hours very uncomfortable. As you can see, there's a thin little mat on the floor. I thought about Mandela spending 18 years sleeping on a mat like that, and I did my best to try and soften it up. I laid down those gray blankets, which are very itchy. They're not comfortable at all. So I spent most of it awake, trying to figure out how to sleep. So it wasn't a very comfortable. It wasn't restful. That's for certain.
Did you interact with any visitors of the exhibit?
There were a couple of people that, mostly staff, that came by to acknowledge the ceremony and to have short discussions. But for the most part, the people that were walking through, observing the exhibit, they were respectful. I think there was a sign that said, that they were free to talk to the staff, and they were respectful in not approaching me.
How did it feel to have your mobility so limited?
I think that's one of the lessons that we need to recognize, is that freedom of mobility is not necessarily the entirety of where we might find freedom. We have to I think ponder the possibility that even within a state of restricted mobility, Mandela found a way to grow and to find love and to find hope and to find freedom, even within the at least notions of freedom, even within the confined spaces. We know that there had been times when he'd been offered his freedom to leave the jail. We know that he was offered conditions to denounce certain activities of his friends, and he said, no, that type of freedom that you're offering me is not the freedom I'm looking for. So mobility and freedom are not necessarily, the most defining factors. It's something more spiritual, and I think that that's one of the lessons we take from his life.
In the 27 hours, were there any moments that were particularly overwhelming as you reflected?
I had the chance to be sitting here and looking at that wall that talks about mobilization, and we know that at certain times, throughout Mandela's prison sentence, there was people that were coming together, mobilizing. You had students, you had the churches, you had the unions coming together, creating an international effort, mobilizing in a way, to create, the international pressure to push for embargoes on South Africa. And at one point I was almost upset that we haven't, as Indigenous people here, we haven't gotten to that level of organization. I don't want to be angry or upset with anybody, but why haven't we mobilized as Indigenous people when we know the consequences of what we're living with in a colonizing nation state here in Canada? Why aren't we organizing and mobilizing in an effective way with our allies from not only here at home but other parts of the world?
So what will your biggest takeaway from this be in terms of future action?
Well, I'm going to continue to do what I need to do. I don't run in anybody's elections. I'm not part of the Indianac system or the colonial political system that's sponsored. I'm not part of that system at all. I'll continue to go to the Sundance and learn our governance system through there, and share my thoughts and ideas with people of like minds, and we'll hopefully build a momentum towards rebuilding our traditional forms of governance here. And that's what I take away from this, is the resolve to continue to push forward.
I know you explained it a little bit, that you were just going to come in and sit down for 27 hours before consulting with staff. What kind of really sparked you to want to do that?
Well, I had originally thought that when we think about freedom, that people might think that the real pursuit of freedom is to find a way to participate in public government, or to find a way to control public government. And I didn't want that. I didn't believe in that message. I don't believe in that message. I think that freedom has to be found from within. And I think that, when I thought about, my message coming through, it didn't make sense to do this as a protest or as a sit-in, but to collaborate and to share a positive message as opposed to a conflict-based message.
So you've finished your 27 hours. What are you hoping happens next?
Well, I walk away from here having broken the fast. That the drum has been sounded, the food has been shared. The people that care about me have given me a hug, and I walk away from here with no expectation whatsoever from anybody.
But what is the result? Like, what did you want to happen from this?
I spend less time focusing on what I want to happen and more time focusing on the task at hand. And I've completed sitting here for 27 hours without any food and water, in isolation, and I've completed the task, and now I can move on to the next one. So I'm sorry I don't have a more definitive expectation or for you to articulate.
It looked like your hand was shaking a little bit when you were taking the food there. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a little bit better. The water and the berries helping me out a little bit, but I was weak. I've done 5 days in the bush without food and water, so I know I can go a lot longer. But I think that this environment, fasting inside of a concrete structure, I think it takes your energy from you as opposed to gives you energy. When you're out on the land, you're absorbing energy in different ways, and I found my energy being sapped very quickly in this concrete structure. So I think I'm going to be okay quickly. Just have a proper meal now.
So maybe one more question.
Can I just ask, sorry to interrupt you something, but to what extent was this about personal reflection, and to what extent was it making a point?
I think that I always struggle with that. I walked from my mom's residential school, to our community a few years back. I've jumped on my motorcycle and I've driven through treaty communities all through the West, and I wonder how much of these are personal reflections and how much of it are for broader purposes. I think that's a question that we can all ask ourselves each and every time we wake up, is how much of what I'm doing today a reflection of what I want personally for myself and what I offer to the greater world. I try not to operate from ego. I've worked very hard through our ceremonies, our Sundance Lodge, to try to understand the differentiation between spirit work and ego work. And I hope that what I bring here is spirit-based. I really do believe it is. So it's not a personal endeavor at all.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Very much. Thank you.
Hi, we're here at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in the exhibit Mandela Struggle for Freedom. My name is Isabelle Masson. I'm the curator of the exhibit. We've just heard Derek Nepinak, Nibin Makwa, an Indigenous leader from Manitoba, talking about his experience and sharing his thoughts after spending 27 hours in our reproduction of Mandela's prison cell on Robben Island, 27 hours for the 27 years that Mandela spent in prison as part of his struggle against apartheid in South Africa. He shared his thoughts with us, his broader reflection about what the experience meant to him, what it can mean for us collectively in Canada in terms of acknowledging the issues that Indigenous people face here. Part of his approach and his intent with this experience was to reflect on the similarities and the parallels between the experience of Black South African facing oppression in South Africa from apartheid as a system, but with deep colonial roots in South Africa, and then reflecting about these parallels and similarities here with what Indigenous people face here in Canada. Thank you for joining us for this. If you would like to see and experience the cell as well, you can do so by visiting our exhibition, Mandela Struggle for Freedom.